Yes! Woo-hoo-hoo! Let's go! Why am I so amped up? Because I am finally a Canadian citizen. After 11 long years, it is finally over and done with, man. This is officially one of my flags along with the Turkish flag. They both happen to be white and red, so those are my colors, I guess. It is done. I am a Canadian citizen. It took 11 years just for the Canadian side of things to process. But before that, there was another 9-year period where I was waiting to get my American citizenship, which never happened, which is why I'm in Canada in the first place. And this video is gonna be about that immigration journey, because if you've been through any immigration journey in any country, you know how incredibly grueling and difficult it is. It is so stressful, I can't even say it, because it takes so many years. I'm 28 now, and finally I have this. It all started when my family moved to America when I was 8 years old. That was in 2003. And my family spent the next 8 years or so trying to get their American green card. I remember my dad always taking photos of me and my sister for the American green card applications. At the end of 2010, my father decided to travel to Montreal, actually, where I'm living now. He wanted to see a friend of his who lives in the city, and while he was here, he decided to go to the American consulate to get our US visas extended because we were all in the States because of his work permit. I was in grade 10. So my dad goes to Montreal. We're living in Dallas, Texas at the time, and he goes to the consulate, and instead of actually making his visa length longer, they cancel all the visas completely, which meant my father could not enter back into the US. So he called my mother and said, yeah, this is the situation. What are we gonna do? Well, they decided to move back to Turkey. They had no other choice. They're like, yeah, we gotta leave America. So they all left America and went back to Turkey. They sent me to a boarding school in Canada for 6 months in Toronto. And after that was over, in mid-2011, I joined them in Turkey. Now, the entire time we're in Turkey, we're always thinking, okay, we're gonna get our American green card any day now. It's in the process, we just gotta wait. And we literally waited 14 months. Sorry, I waited 14 months. They waited about 22 months in total for this entire thing. And every month we're like, yeah, next month we'll get our papers, it'll be fine. And then the next month comes along and it doesn't come. And it just that process kept repeating. It was so painful and annoying. Eventually, we ended up going to the American embassy in Ankara. And I remember this day really, really well too, because we got there at 8 a.m. and they call you to the counter based on what their preference is. It's just such a really shitty place. I hate American consulates of any kind because they don't treat you like human beings. They treat you like dogs. You can't bring a phone, can't bring an umbrella, can't bring a coat. You got to go through like 10 different security checkpoints. It's horrible. And we were the last people they actually saw there. The last people in that entire room at noon was when we finally got to go and talk to the clerk at the counter. I'm expecting something good to come from this, but it was evidence after that meeting that they were not gonna give us any kind of residency back to the US. And they said, okay, your papers are going back into processing. Check back in a few months. And sometime later in the summer of 2012, my father sent them an email. Now, he had done this many times, but they never responded. But this time they responded to his email. And he was curious as to what our application process was. They responded back by saying our papers, our application had been sent back to the US, to Washington, D.C. from Ankara on the basis that they revoke it. This happened about 4 months prior to that email, and we were only finding out about it right then and there. So that was a really, really, really big dick punch, because that essentially confirmed that we would not be going to America anytime soon. And I was in grade 11, about to start grade 12. I really wanted to go to college in America, go to university. I wanted to go to Texas A&M. That's someplace I always had on my mind. That was not gonna happen. So my family was just devastated because our life was kind of on pause. We had so much things going on for us in the States, but all of a sudden that's not gonna happen. But in the next 2 days, we decided to go to Canada because we're like, we're not gonna live in Turkey anymore. We wanna live in the Western Hemisphere, in the US or Canada, we're gonna go to Canada. So we literally packed everything up, and in 2 weeks' time, we literally moved everything, closed our apartment, got on the plane, and went to Toronto, Canada. Of course, one of the first things my father did was try to get the immigration stuff in check. Now, at this point, I'm 17 years old, and we had already gone through an immigration process which didn't work. We literally had to go back to our home country and go to a different country. So in my head, I'm like, man, immigration processes suck. It's so hard. Little did I know it was gonna get so much harder. Later that year, my father met this Turkish guy who claimed he was a lawyer. Now, this guy said he can submit all our immigration paperwork for Canada and that he would get us a Canadian permanent residence in no time. And I guess my dad trusted him, which was a huge mistake because my family submitted our immigration application for Canada many times, and every time it came back with some kind of error. There was an error in the paperwork, some dates weren't filled out, maybe it was sent to the wrong address, whatever it was. This Turkish would-be lawyer, idiot liar, completely fucked us. And shortly after our papers came back, the government of Canada did something which was the equivalent of me taking a knee, an elbow, a bullet, and then a friggin' cannon right to the nuts. What they did is they changed the age of dependent children. Now, the way it works is if you're under the age of 22, you can apply with your family if they're applying for permanent residence in Canada. That was the old law. Well, in 2014, the government of Canada at the time was led by the Conservatives and a prime minister named Stephen Harper. He changed that law so that age of 22 went down to 19, which meant if you're over the age of 19, you can no longer apply with your family. And I had just turned 19. So that meant I couldn't apply with them. Now, if that idiot lawyer had submitted our applications properly in any one of those times he did, this would not have been a problem. I would have applied with them, gotten it with them, became a citizen years ago. But of course, that's not how it happened. I essentially got locked out and left out of my family's application process. I had no choice. That's just how bureaucracy works sometimes. We literally met with the immigration minister of Canada. His name was Chris Alexander at the time with Harper. And he said he was going to help us out. Nothing came of that. And in 2015, the government of Canada changed. The Justin Trudeau Liberals came into power, and one of their campaign promises was that they would reverse this dependent child age from 19 back to 22. That was a promise they had. They came into power, I think it was late 2015. And when they did, I actually went to a conference or a forum where the new immigration minister, a guy named John McCallum, was answering questions. And I asked him a question. I'm like, hey, this was one of the promises y'all had when you guys were campaigning. What's going to happen with this? And he gave me a straight up answer. He's like, we're working on it. But just so you know, it takes about a year and a half for the law to get passed, for it to get ratified, for it to get read in the House of Commons, for the senators to vote on it. Just such a long process. He said it would take a year and a half. Now, it had already been a year and a half since the law was changed, and now this guy is telling me it's going to be a year and a half longer. Well, the time passed. And in 2017, that law got reversed. So now, if you were over the age of 19, but under the age of 22, you could apply with your family, but that was only valid for new applications, and I had just turned 22. So there was no way for anyone to help me. I literally got locked out in that time frame of the law being changed twice, and it completely screwed me over both times. People in my situation weren't even talked about. No one even mentioned anyone in my situation and what was going to happen to us. We literally got forgotten about. So the only option I had at this time, I was still in school and I couldn't apply for my residency and my citizenship. My family at this point had already become permanent residents and were on their way to becoming citizens. And I'm like, okay, I got to graduate school and then I can apply and somehow get my permanent residence and then get my citizenship. So I graduate school in 2018, and there are so many immigration programs in Canada. The one I chose to apply with is called Canadian Experience Class, which is essentially you need to have 1 year of Canadian working experience in Canada, and then you can apply for permanent residence. Now, there are so many jobs in this sector. Every single one of them you need to go to school for. It's very hard. Like, it's not just they don't accept any job in Canada. For example, if you work in retail, or if you're a bartender, or if you're some kind of store worker or an entry-level job, they don't accept you into this program. Only certain jobs are accepted. One of these jobs that was accepted is cooking, because in the eyes of the government, to be a cook, you got to go to culinary school. You got to get an education. You can't just go into a kitchen and work. At least that's what they thought in their eyes. What did I do? I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to learn how to cook, because to me, this was a way forward. And now I can actually get my permanent residence by cooking. I went to a job interview in the beginning of 2019 to a restaurant in Aurora, Toronto called Levetto. And I went there, and the two owners came and talked to me. And they're like, okay, why don't you cook for us? You said you can cook, because I had told them I knew how to cook on my resume when I didn't really know how to do it. I'd cooked at home a little bit. I'd cooked in university pubs with like a microwave, but I'd never actually cooked in a restaurant before. And this was a pasta restaurant with fresh pasta, and I had no idea what to do. And I'm like, okay, gotta try it, right? Now, this is where my curiosity came in handy, because prior to that job, I had worked at a restaurant called Boston Pizza, and I was a server there. But I was always close to the cooks. I talked to them a lot, and I was naturally curious. So when they were making pasta, I'd be like, what are you guys doing? How are you guys making that? You know, what are you guys doing? Like, tell me the process. And I'd seen them make it a lot of times. I had an idea of what to do, and I get in the kitchen in this restaurant in Levetto, and the stove is not turning on. I couldn't turn it on. It just was not working. And I'm like, am I going to ask the owner now for advice on how to turn the stove on? I have no choice. So I asked him, and it turns out it wasn't my fault. The stove was actually not working for some reason. So we had to fix it quickly. And I threw in some tagliatelle in the boiling water. I added some tomato sauce in a pot. I just mixed it up a little bit. I didn't even add salt. And I put it together, put it on a plate. It looked like a mess. The owner tasted it. Somehow, thanks to God, with the help of God, the pasta was cooked perfectly in that water. And I ended up getting that job, and I was like, I am not going to waste this. I'm going to be an amazing worker. I'm going to learn everything there is to know about this. And for the next year, that's what I did. I grinded in that kitchen, working 10 hours a day, just standing up on my feet all day long, just very, very grueling kitchen work. And if you ever worked in a kitchen, you know exactly how hard and demanding it really is. I was also a pasta cook and a prep cook. I was doing both those things. It was so ridiculously grueling and hard, but I knew what I was doing it for. I knew I had to do this in order to get my permanent residence and my citizenship. Then, oh, the flag is falling. Need the flag up. Then in 2020 February, I had finally completed my 1 year of a Canadian experience, and I could apply for permanent residence with the help of the owner in the restaurant. He wrote me a letter saying that I had worked there and everything was done properly and according to the law. And in March of 2020, in the first week of March, I submitted my application. And you know what happened in the next 2 weeks? COVID hit out of nowhere. Thankfully, I had submitted my application already, like I said. So, because they literally paused all immigration applications. And if I had waited a few more weeks, I would have had no way to apply. But luckily, it was already in the application. So, it was moving along a bit slower than normal, but it was still moving along. And it looked like everything was going to work. And in January of 2021, I got my permanent residence in Canada. I remember getting an email saying, hey, it got delivered to you. You're now a permanent resident. I'm reading that, I'm like, oh my God, it's finally, wow, I can stay in Canada now. That's friggin' awesome. I was so happy and ecstatic, and I kept doing my thing. I kept working. The last 2 years, I kind of forgot how hard it was, because before I had my permanent residence, there were so many nights I couldn't sleep properly, just worrying about immigrating, worrying about whether or not I'm going to be able to stay here. just, it's so painful because I had already failed at one country before. And I'm like, what if I fail here again? And it sucked because I had no control over these decisions. It was just what was going to happen. I could just do my best and hope it was going to be enough. Not to mention, it cost tens of thousands of dollars from my own pocket to pay for this application because it was ridiculously expensive. I decided to work with a good lawyer, especially seeing after how that other lawyer completely screwed us over. I'm like, I gotta get a good lawyer. I gotta do this properly. And I did. They were awesome. They absolutely helped me so much. They were tremendous. They were expensive, but tremendous is the important thing. And finally, earlier this year in 2023, it had been 2 years since I had permanent residence. So I was now eligible to apply for citizenship. And I was so happy and ecstatic, I couldn't wait. My lawyer told me I got to take a Canadian citizenship test, and I studied nonstop for that test. It was 20 questions. I got 19 of them right. I missed only one. So that's just a testament to how seriously I was taking this. And 3 days ago, I became a Canadian citizen. I raised my right hand at a ceremony. I swore an oath of allegiance to Canada. And I am now a Canadian citizen. I'm going to get my passport soon in the next few days. It is incredible. I cried at the ceremony because it was just absolutely insane. I had dreamt of that moment for so long. And now that it was finally over, I was so ecstatic and happy. It was truly one of the greatest days of my life because of how long it took, and it all worked out. Thankfully, it just took so long. But now, je suis Canadien. Yeah, that's it for today. I'll see you next time.